I'm Daniel Blakey, the Member of Parliament for Elmwood-Transcona and the NDP's Democratic Reform critic. The Prime Minister enjoys a lot of power in the Canadian system of government, but perhaps one of the most important powers that the Prime Minister has is the ability to dissolve or prorogue Parliament at will. What that means is the Prime Minister can call an election at any time that he wants, and at any point, if he's not happy with what's going on in Parliament, he can tear up all that work, stop Parliament with a prorogation, and have parliamentarians have to start back from scratch. This is something that I don't think makes a lot of sense in a 21st century democracy, because Parliament is the body that's supposed to hold the government to account. It makes no sense to allow the head of the government all of this power to decide when that body will meet and on what terms and conditions. And in countries that also have Westminster systems like ours, we've seen in the UK, for example, some limits put on the Prime Minister's power to do this, requiring a vote in the House of Commons. So these are important powers of the Prime Minister. They're the kinds of powers some might refer to as gatekeeping powers. And that's why I presented a motion to give the House of Commons a bigger say on when the House of Commons meets, whether the House of Commons will dissolve for an election, whether the work of the House of Commons will be brought to a close by some kind of prorogation. And in the first hour of debate on Friday, there were a couple of surprises. I was glad to see the Bloc Québécois declare support for the motion. I was surprised to see the Liberals not have a position yet. And I was especially surprised at the Conservatives. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, spends a lot of time attacking the Prime Minister and attacking the gatekeeping powers of the Prime Minister. This is a clear opportunity for Pierre Poilievre to put limits on the power of the Prime Minister to do these things, to put limits on the power of the Prime Minister to shut down Parliament. And Pierre Poilievre seems to have blinked for reasons not readily apparent. And I think this is consistent with a theme when it comes to Pierre Poilievre and his talk about gatekeeping. Consider, for instance, that he likes to talk about gatekeeping in housing, but he really only talks about public gatekeeping in the housing market. When it comes to private sector gatekeepers, he's silent. Big corporate landlords that are buying up affordable units, rent-evicting the tenants, jacking up rents, or selling them as condos, those folks are gatekeeping access to housing just as much as any elected public official. But Pierre Poilievre has nothing to say about those people, and he has no real solutions to ensure that that gatekeeping doesn't get in the way of Canadians having an affordable home. Pierre Poilievre likes to talk about gatekeepers when it comes to inflation, but he refuses to talk about the role that private companies like Loblaws and others have played in jacking up the prices for Canadians to get access to one of the most important things, food. Why is it that Pierre Poilievre has nothing to say about people who are gatekeeping access to food by setting unreasonably high prices? When we think about access to prescription drugs and medication, Pierre Poilievre, again, likes to talk about gatekeepers, but he's got nothing to say about the big pharmaceutical companies that are responsible for Canadians paying the third highest rates in the world for prescription drugs. What does Pierre Poilievre have to say about that? Nothing at all, except maybe that we should join a class action lawsuit against promoters of OxyContin. And while he's not wrong to say that Canada should do that, that's something New Democrats have been calling for a long time. When it comes to the single most thing that would attack the gatekeeping power of pharmaceutical companies, a national pharmacare plan that would mobilize the power of bulk purchasing and ensure that every Canadian got access to prescription drugs, he votes against it. He doesn't just not say anything about it, he actively attacks it. And now he's got a clear opportunity to go after the gatekeeping powers of the Prime Minister, and where is he? Nowhere. Nowhere to be seen. He's chosen to blink instead of putting some meaningful constraints on this otherwise unfettered power of the Prime Minister. And I'll tell you, it's one thing to criticize gatekeepers. I think the appropriate response is to look at things like my motion to put some constraints, some democratic constraints on the power of the Prime Minister. It's important to engage ideas like pharmacare in order to put some real constraints on the gatekeeping powers of pharmaceutical companies. But I say to Canadians, beware the man who criticizes gatekeepers but has no solutions to limit their power and asks only that you give those powers to him. That's a person to watch out for, because he's not serious about attacking the problem of gatekeeping. He's just trying to become the principal gatekeeper himself. And I think that's the lesson that we're learning through this motion. The good news is that it's not too late. It's not too late for Pierre Poilievre to change his mind. It's not too late for Pierre Poilievre to work with New Democrats to put meaningful democratic controls on the unfettered power of the Prime Minister. I invite him and his caucus to join with me to pass Motion M79 and make it much harder for Prime Ministers in the future, including this Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, in the future, to abuse the powers of prorogation and dissolution. So thank you very much for taking